We've got a full house tonight, so find a spot where you can. Thank you so much for braving the chilly weather to join us tonight. It's great to be with you. My name is Scott St. Louis, and I have the privilege of serving as program manager for the Common Ground Initiative at the Hauenstein Center, right here at Grand Valley State University. On behalf of everyone on staff, we welcome you to Loosemore Auditorium as we gather for a presentation by our fearless leader, Gleaves Whitney. We are particularly thankful for the Hauenstein family members in attendance this evening, as well as for President and Mrs. Haas, Peter and Joan Secchia, Annette Kirk, a longtime Hauenstein Center partner, our current and former elected officials, and members of the Grand Valley State University Board of Trustees and senior management team. We are likewise grateful for everyone who supports the Hauenstein Center, and I'd like to take a moment to recognize the contributions of the people here this evening who make it possible for us to share Colonel Ralph W. Hauenstein's legacy with the rising generation. Let's have a round of applause. As many of you know, the Hauenstein Center has three important roles. We are a presidential study center, we're home to the Common Ground Initiative, and we're a center for leadership excellence. Our Peter C. Cooke Leadership Academy is currently providing more than 60 student fellows with rigorous educational and professional development opportunities. Many of you already know that we enjoy sharing the stage with our fellows at Hauenstein Center events. In fact, our Leadership Minutes series has given some of these students a chance to share the experiences that drew them to the Academy, how the Academy has shaped their growth as leaders, and what they plan to do in the future with what they've learned at the Hauenstein Center. Tonight's Leadership Minute will be given by Lilia Hauenstein, who is completing her third year in the Cooke Leadership Academy. Please help me give a warm welcome to Lilia.
My name is Lilia Hauenstein, and I am a Cooke Leadership Academy Fellow. Before joining the Academy as a sophomore, the most I had ever experienced with leadership was bringing people together in the classroom. I would always be the glue that held members together in group projects. Acknowledging that I had room to grow and that I was willing to improve myself, the Leadership Academy was an ideal program for me. Lilia then and Lilia now are two completely different people. Back then, as a second-year student surrounded by upperclassmen with inspiring backgrounds, I was encouraged to cultivate my own leadership qualities. The self-reflection seminars, wheelhouse talks, Common Ground Initiative events, and other opportunities within the Academy have helped me grow in ways I did not anticipate when I started. Returning to the Academy after studying abroad in Japan for a year, I'm now determined to inspire and encourage others in circumstances similar to my own not long ago. Through the Academy, I gained solid support for my dream to live and work in Japan. My hope is to reach professional fluency in Japanese and to combine with my language skills with my knowledge and passion for Japan's culture to make a positive impact on the business world. Knowing that the Academy has been by my side here and around the world, I'm confident I will make my dream a reality. My name is Lilia Hauenstein, and I'm a leader.
Thank you, Lilia. Now, usually this moment of the program is where I have the opportunity to introduce a guest of the Hauenstein Center, but tonight I'm introducing a scholar and mentor with whom I've worked for more than 2 years now, and whom I've known for 4.5. Gleaves Whitney has been the first full-time director of the Hauenstein Center since 2003, presiding over its growth into the preeminent presidential studies center in the Midwest. During his tenure, the Hauenstein Center has produced hundreds of public events, including numerous national conferences covered by C-SPAN. His vision and hard work have yielded some of the most creative civic and liberal education programs in higher education today, including the famous God and War debate between brothers Christopher and Peter Hitchens, referenced on 60 Minutes, as well as a conversation between the famous intellectual sparring partners Robert George and Cornel West, and the biennial Character in the Presidency series initiated in partnership with Hank Meyer and Peter Secchia. Gleaves has brought fellows of the Cooke Leadership Academy face-to-face with 4 U.S. presidents, 3 first ladies, 2 vice presidents, 4 secretaries of state, 6 state governors, multiple Pulitzer Prize-winning writers, a Grammy Award winner, and a national championship basketball coach, among many, many others. His conversations with thinking leaders and leading thinkers throughout West Michigan and the nation have generated many stories that he shares with us around the office, including one involving a former president who you will hear more about tonight. These events and encounters that Gleaves has pursued continue to shape the Hauenstein Center's Common Ground Initiative and Cooke Leadership Academy into transformative opportunities for Grand Valley students. They raise the profile of our institution at national and international levels alike. And in addition to all the ways we keep him busy at the Hauenstein Center, Gleaves also finds the time to contribute to historical scholarship on the American presidency and the Midwest. He's authored or edited 16 books, with several more on the way. On a personal note, I can tell you that Gleaves is the kind of person who defined my undergraduate years at Grand Valley, not just as another 4 years of schooling, but as a true education, as a journey, often surprising, always worthwhile, that turned me into a different person than I was when I started. I remember one of the first opportunities I had to spend time with Gleaves back in my third year of undergraduate study. We were in Berkeley, California, attending an academic conference alongside a few other students and Hauenstein Center staff members. And one presentation in particular at this conference was unlike anything I had ever seen or heard. A set of bongo drums were involved, to make a long story short. And at the end of the presentation, Gleaves shot me a glance, leaned over to me and said, "Scott, if I ever do anything like that, please put me out of my misery." I think that bodes well for everyone here tonight. Please help me welcome Gleaves. Excellent.
Thank you, Scott. The bonus is in the mail. Scott's done a great job. I've got to say, an organization is not about the leader. There are many, many fine people in this room who have contributed to Grand Valley, who have contributed to the Hauenstein Center. I have a wonderful staff. I love this staff. They've done a great job year in and year out, and Scott certainly exhibits the best traits that we want to see in a Grand Valley graduate. Go Lakers. Well, the timing. Yeah, the timing today. I ran into a number of you before I walked into this auditorium, and all of you were sort of just amazed. This talk had been proposed, I don't know, last July, last August. We set the date. I had no idea. I promise I take no credit for what happened after that with regard to people leaving from this world and going to the next. But as you know, the White House has declared today a day of national mourning. And so we get to say goodbye to the 41st President of the United States. And I'd like to share some thoughts with you. Some of these I wrote down in the wee hours of Saturday morning after I learned of his passing. I got to shake hands with George Herbert Walker Bush for the first time when I was a 10-year-old kid. My family lived in Houston in the 7th Congressional District that he represented on Capitol Hill. Later, when I worked for Governor John Engler, I had the privilege of writing a few speeches for our 41st president. He'd come to Michigan. I'd get to talk to him briefly. It was great to get to know him in campaign mode like that. A few years after that, after 1992, he let me interview him for a book I was writing. And he was a wonderful interview, very generous with his time, forthright, didn't hold back. This is the kind of person a historian wants to talk to get the scoop. And then I took this would have been February of 2005, I took a group of Cooke Leadership Academy fellows to College Station, Texas, and we met President Bush at the Bush Library in College Station. In each of these encounters, even the time when I was a little kid, he was warm, he was genuine, gracious, a kind and decent human being. But the memory of him that I treasure goes back to President's Day, 2003, when Mr. Bush welcomed my family to his office on Memorial Drive in Houston. Our son Ian was shipping off to the Iraq War that was impending, and we talked maybe a half hour. And then President Bush took Ian's 2 young brothers, put one on each knee, stroked their backs. He said, "Your older brother's going to be all right." Well, on behalf of all of us at the Hauenstein Center and associated with Grand Valley, I want to thank you, President Bush, for your service to our country, and thank you for the kindness and decency with which you've served. May you rest in peace. As we've been saying goodbye to our 41st president, many of us have been reflecting on how President Bush's life actually holds up a mirror, I think, to Americans today. It strikes me that we are not just mourning the loss of a warm, principled, capable patriot who guided us through the end of the Cold War. We are mourning, to some extent, the decline of a culture that made it possible for a man like George Herbert Walker Bush to lead. He came from a consensus culture, a servant culture, a culture that valued character over pedigree and personality, a culture that did much good. Now, this past weekend, the novelist Thomas Mallon, writing for The New Yorker, said something that I think is apt for this evening. George H.W. Bush is likely to be remembered as the last president of the Republic not to have been intensely despised by a significant portion of its population. Boy, does that have the ring of truth. How do you explain the magic of this Lone Star Yankee, especially his genius for making friends with people from across the political spectrum and people around the world? We've seen the outpouring of tributes this week, the gratitude of so many who remember Mr. Bush for his down-home warmth, for helping people in need, for showing vulnerability. I think he was arguably the president who wept more openly for us than any other president we've ever seen. It was all genuine. It was never manufactured. He also had this cornball sense of humor that made people groan. Did you hear the one about the duck that went into the bar? Bartender looked at the duck and said, "Your pants are down." Ducks, down, feather beds. Yes, and now you're grown. Let's hear a good groan. Yes. He was telling that joke on the campaign trail in 1992, and I think it's why he lost. Mr. Bush's friendships are captured in tens of thousands of handwritten notes, a trademark from his days as an undergraduate at Yale. His memoir, All the Best, My Life in Letters, includes one note that illustrates what made this man so beautiful. It was to Anne Devroy, whom Bush described as a tough, tenacious reporter for the Washington Post. President Bush said that many a morning Anne's article raised his hackles. But 3 years after he left office, he found out that she had contracted cancer. She was still young. She was only 48 years old at this point, and this is the letter that George Bush penned to Anne. Dear Anne, I feel a little funny writing this, for there was a tension, perhaps an inevitable tension, that clouded things between us. Never a visceral dislike, but a tension. But now I am out of politics, happy in my very private life, away from the arena, and you are on leave fighting a battle that far transcends the battles of the political wars. Strangely, wonderfully, I feel close to you now. I want you to win this battle. I want that same toughness that angered me and frustrated me, that same toughness to see you through your fight. I want you to walk out of MD Anderson victorious, having won the battle of your life. Affectionately, George. "30 years ago, Mr. Bush called for a kinder, gentler nation from democracy's front porch, our nation's capital. He was frustrated with the polarizing forces that were wedging our culture and politics apart. Sound familiar? Well, back in 1989, he couldn't even have begun to imagine the kinds of divisive forces that would be unleashed in our country since then. Like the trolls on social media who use their, let's call it, keyboard courage to get the worst out of people possible, draw them out, and then to spread some mistake that they've made around the world. Let's put the problem on all fours. When you came into this auditorium, I'd wager at least one person caught your eye. Think of that person. Something about that person attracts you. But if you found out how that person voted for Trump, Kavanaugh, and the midterm elections, you are very likely, 50% of you, are likely to do a 180 and loathe that person. More, you would do everything in your power, according to the survey data, everything in your power to keep your child from marrying their child. The social science suggests that the spread of incivility, the erosion of common ground, and the plague of polarization are not just taking place in a faraway Congress, not just taking place in a faraway White House, but taking place a little bit closer, inside us, in our hearts. So maybe the next time we catch ourselves in the mirror, maybe the person we should be looking at is ourselves. Why is this happening to us and our country? Lots of pundits had offered lots of reasons, and certainly all of these factors play a part. But I'm going to argue that the root cause of our polarization, and I'm not the only one arguing it these days, I think it's an epidemic of loneliness. Loneliness. Increasing numbers of our fellow citizens feel that they are cut off from others. They walk around with a sense of frustration and anger and desolation of spirit, even in a crowd. As a result, they don't have much buy-in whether one candidate wins or another candidate, or whether one ballot proposal goes forward or another ballot proposal goes forward, or even whether their community is thriving or not. Now, let me be clear. This malady is not just restricted to one party or the other. Republicans, Democrats, and independents share the malady alike. And there's a growing literature that has been looking into Americans' social isolation, their political hyper-individualism, our psychological loneliness. Arguably, the literature of American loneliness originates in Alexis De Tocqueville. Tocqueville came to this country and ended up writing the best book about democracy, and he ended up writing the best book, arguably, about America. In this book, Democracy in America. And in it, from the 1830s, Tocqueville contrasts American loneliness with European connectedness. Aristocracy links everyone, he writes, from peasant to king in one long chain. Democracy breaks the chain. Each man is thereby thrown back on himself alone, and there is a danger that the American may be shut up in the solitude of his own heart. Think about that powerful line. Shut up in the solitude of his own heart. An observation from the 1830s. Is there something about democracy that's dangerous to our health as individuals and to the body politic? Maybe so if the surrounding culture does not support the habits that are necessary for democracy to thrive. Brian Jones observes that according to Tocqueville, I'm quoting, "The shift from aristocratic to democratic conditions is not merely a change of political forms. Democracy produces a set of psychological and even imaginative changes that cause democratic citizens to see themselves in a new way. The novel manner thus described is one in which citizens gradually come to view themselves as separated and cut off. The displacement from nature, family, place, and intergenerational bonds that once held citizens together. Is that what gives rise to democratic society?" If so, ladies and gentlemen, how ironic our form of government, a democracy of the people, by the people, for the people. I'm emphasizing people because that's the way Abraham Lincoln said those words at the Gettysburg Address. He emphasized not the prepositions, but people. So does our democracy, our form of government, actually lead to an inordinate isolation? Well, the subjective sense of loneliness in our culture is backed by the social science. It's a pretty grim picture, actually. Recent surveys by the Kaiser Family Foundation and The Economist, as well as by UCLA Loneliness Scale and Cigna, have painted a picture that is, I think, truly shocking. Let me give you 4 data. Half of Americans report that they rarely or never have a significant, extended conversation with another human being in their own home. 2 in 5 Americans do not think their relationships with others are meaningful, even in their own home. 1 in 4 Americans report that no one really gets them or understands them, even in their own home. And 1 in 7 Americans says nobody knows them well, even in their own home. Nobel Prize novelist Sigrid Undset wrote some early letters that shine a light on what loneliness looks like. I don't want to ponder this and stay with this too long. We'll just all get too far down. But it's a description that I ran into recently, and it really struck me. Quote, "I never meet anyone who interests me in a truly warm and personal way when I come close. I've lain in my bed and wept night after night and listed everything I thought that was rich and good inside of me, examined and grieved over those things because they couldn't buy me the love of a single human being." Now, given the numbers of Americans who say they are lonely, is it any surprise in America today suicide rates are up, overdose deaths have reached epidemic levels, and our lifespan, for the first time, is actually getting shorter? The social scientist Arthur Brooks argues that loneliness is not only killing us, it's causing people to fill the hole in their hearts by embracing angry politics. Do a Google search and you will find that angry politics is the new term of art, trying to get its arms around what is happening to our country. For increasing numbers of Americans, whether Republican, Democratic, Independent, angry politics are filling the hole in their heart. It is a root cause of our age of fracture. One last thing to consider before I move on to the next section, just something for your consideration. Have you ever thought about why it is that when we get into an argument with somebody, our voices grow louder? It's as though the emotional separation that we experience with another human being has a parallel in a physical separation. It's like we have to yell across the Grand Canyon to make our point. Okay. The corollary to rampant loneliness is a friendship deficit. It is seen in the neurotic eagerness with which we seek likes on Facebook, as if all those effortless clicks were some kind of sign of true friendship. Albert Schweitzer said this about true friendship. I love this metaphor. He didn't say that. I'm saying about what I'm about to say. In everybody's life, there comes a time when their inner fire burns down to dying embers. But then it bursts back into flame by an unexpected encounter with another human being. Be thankful for those rare people in your life who rekindle that inner spirit. We know how this rekindling of the inner spirit takes place. Conversation. As Oscar Wilde observed, ultimately the bond of all companionship, whether in marriage or friendship, is conversation. The art of conversation is as simple as it is hard, as natural as it is acquired. It's the remedy to loneliness and certainly one of the requirements for any pretense of finding common ground. Now, it's easy to listen and talk to others when we agree, but how about when we disagree, when there's that significant difference of opinion that gets our hackles up, a difference of opinion over, say, religion and politics? Allow me to turn to these two subjects that we're not supposed to touch at cocktail parties, because in both arenas, I think we've discovered recently some spectacular progress that people have made in overcoming seemingly insuperable barriers to our friendship and our civic friendship. Consider religion, because if people who hold different faiths can become friends, then just about any two people in the world can become friends, right? Well, I'd like to give a shout out to the Kaufman Interfaith Institute here at Grand Valley. Is Doug Kinchy here? Doug Kinchy directs the Kaufman Institute. Wonderful colleague. They've done great work. And some of the most difficult work they have done has been to bring together people in the Middle East who come from very different traditions. So Doug will bring together an imam and a rabbi, and he'll have them actually sit down and talk. And we've had them on this stage in our co-partner programs. And it's illuminating to watch these people actually able to have a conversation. And when the question comes up, how do people like that talk to each other when there's been so much violence, so much spiritual destruction in addition to physical and soul repair that's needed? And to watch what happens is pretty amazing. I was shocked by the first time this question was posed and we listened to the answer. The answer is that everyone in, say, a district that has been bombed or has had terrible hardship, what they share in common is a capacity for empathy with each other, even if they have a divide between them religiously. Why? Because they have suffered. Maybe they have post-traumatic stress. Maybe they have, PTSD caused by traumatic brain injury. So when you look at that, Herm Kaiser, I'm looking at Artis Kaiser. Herm Kaiser just did wonderful work on this. But people who've worked with PTSD know that people who've suffered from that can form bonds of empathy and even affection. And ladies and gentlemen, we host a PTSD conference. It's one of our service projects. My son was in the Air Force in the Iraq War, and so it's a commitment at the Hauenstein Center. President Haas has been tremendously supportive of this. Every May, we bring together people to talk about the challenges there. But what ends up happening, we watch it. So many people come in, they sit exactly where you are. It's on this stage that this happens. They hear these presentations, and they don't know people when they come in, and they walk out, and they're friends. They share something. So we've actually seen this happen at the Hauenstein Center. Empathy is a very important way of connecting, but how do we get there? People always ask me, what do you actually do to bring it about? Well, what you can start doing is what Bob Quinn does. We brought Bob over in April. He's one of the leadership gurus at the University of Michigan, has an international reputation for his ability to bring disparate peoples together and get them to connect. So when Bob was with us, what he did, and he did this from the stage with our leadership fellows, he did it in our dining room over there, the Meyer Regency room. What Bob does is that he has two people sit down and tell a core story about themselves. Who are they in their essential humanity? What is the essence of their identity as a person in our society? They go 3 rounds of stories. And then Bob does the magic. He says, now that you've told each other a little about yourselves, now I want you to draw all the points of connection between you. People who'd never known each other. I think he pairs up people who have different religions and, different politics, just to watch the fun of that happen. But again, it's a technique that works, and we've watched it right here. I'm a big believer in it. Look up Bob Quinn's great books, Robert Quinn. Building the Bridge as We Walk on It. It's a good place to start. Then I think of somebody like Peter Kreeft. When Mary Eileen was studying at Harvard this summer, I, for once, I was footloose and fancy-free, could spend my time however I wanted. It's a lot of fun, so I was able to enjoy Harvard's 70 different libraries. And one of the libraries I stumbled into had some Peter Kreeft works. He was at Boston College for a very long career. I think he's emeritus now. But he did some amazing things with getting people to talk across their religious divide. How do you get, say, a Buddhist and a Catholic to talk to each other, for example? Well, he said that religions have 3 components. Religions have the doctrine, they have an ethical system, and they have their saints. And the trick is to get people from different religions to talk about their ethical systems and their saints. Don't talk about the doctrines. As soon as people start talking about their religious doctrines, they start to squabble. They separate. So it's a very interesting technique that Peter Kreeft recommends for us to be able to reach. And across that aisle of religious differences and to create civic friendship and build common ground. There are many other people I could talk about. I have pages and pages here. I won't go through all of it. I could save some of them for Q&A. But again, the point of all of these techniques and this understanding, the research, is to build civic friendship. Now, the other unmentionable at cocktail parties besides religion is politics, and here I think Aristotle's notion of political or civic friendship can help us thousands of years later. Civic friendship is the subject of books 8 and 9 of the Nicomachean Ethics. It takes up about a fifth of that book, and the term that he uses, politicae philia, or political or civic friendship, is at the heart of the work. Now, the ancient Greeks had four words for love. They regarded not eros, but philia as the highest form of love. Philia means friendship, that form of love. It is the highest form of love because friendship is always freely chosen. Let me repeat that because it shocks modern sensibilities. Not eros, which is what our culture is totally hung up on, but philia, to the ancient Greeks, was the highest form of friendship because it was freely chosen. Now, Aristotle goes on to say that this kind of love, philia, is not just a pretty ornament that we put on like clothing. It's an absolute necessity for life, essential for our thriving. And it tells us something, does it not? That a person can have all the power in the world, all the friends or all the money in the world, but if they don't have friends, they're miserable, right? Political community grows out of our natural instinct to associate with each other. We choose friends who will freely cooperate with and benefit from each other. Community also comes from the recognition that every human being has dignity. Aristotle wrote that there are different types of friendship that recognize the inherent dignity of all persons in a community. First are those friendships in which two people simply enjoy each other's company. Second are those in which two people share a moral vision. And third are those friends in which the two people are present for each other, helping and benefiting each other, often in practical ways. These three types of friendship make civic friendship possible in the Aristotelian sense. Not just between, say, two politicians and a politician and a lobbyist, but among citizens. They will share a moral vision. They will benefit each other in some practical way. And this doesn't mean that they always have to like each other, down to every detail of the personality, but they realize that they're part of something greater. And it might mean that they have a commitment to democracy, to the Constitution. It might mean that they vote, they serve on jury duty, they join civic organizations to help others. Aristotle even says that it's friendships that keep our cities together. Given how we experience politics today, that's a radical idea. But let me share an analogy. Imagine a civic community as football teams. And since we're in Michigan, let's imagine the Michigan State Spartans and the Michigan Wolverines. Now, one of the things that I like to tell my OLLI classes is that, if you have, say, at the University of Michigan saying that it is in Ann Arbor, which they call the Athens of the West, if they're the Athens of the West, what does Michigan State have to be? Spartans, the exact opposite of what an Athenian would be like. So it is inevitable, when John Hanna was president of Michigan State, that it'd be the Spartans versus the Athens. And I know it's humbling. The Spartans won the Peloponnesian War. Humbling for this Wolverine. But think of, say, the Big Ten as a league of cities. Think of the University of Michigan as Athens. Think of Michigan State University as Sparta. And now go back to the football analogy. Think about this. Work with me here. When two teams get together, we know that the fan bases ostensibly hate each other. I mean, they're going to have a lot of fun, giving a lot of trash talk and all that kind of thing. But look at what really is happening to the behavior. The real behavior is that the fan base loves the pageantry They love the traditions. They love the great players they've had in the past. They accept the rules of the game, they tolerate the referees, and they'll accept the outcome of the game. Isn't this our experience? So look at what happens. These two fan bases are actually united in their differences. It's a pretty remarkable thing. So I would suggest to you that that's precisely what Aristotle had in mind when he spoke of civic friendship. It doesn't mean that everyone's going to like everyone else. It does not mean that whole populations like other populations necessarily, but they understand they're in the project together. They have a higher purpose for cooperating. And that's a beautiful thing. And Aristotle's words, I think, are just as important now. No. Aristotle's words are more important now because we so trash talk each other as citizens. We so trash talk the other political party. And here's the difference. I have never heard a fellow Wolverine, I have never heard a Spartan say, ever, that they wish that the other team did not exist. They need the team to enjoy all the benefits that come from the game. Unfortunately, we hear a lot of people today say that they wish that the other team, the other political party, didn't exist. Today when I was watching the funeral for George H.W. Bush and listening to the eulogies, I could not help but think of Ralph Hauenstein. I'm looking at the Hauensteins in the front row, Lilia, who did a beautiful job in her leadership minute. I thought of your great-grandfather, your grandfather, father-in-law. So at so many points in those eulogies, I thought this could be a description for Ralph. Somebody who is warm, genuine, generous, from the heart all the time. I've been talking about civic friendship, personal friendship. Ralph had it all. Ralph was a genius when it came to friendship. He knew exactly what the other heart was trying to communicate. And he did it with such a light personality, a great sense of humor. I think I and my staff are just so proud that we work at the Hauenstein Center for Presidential Studies, a place where we have committed to civic friendship. If you look at our Common Ground programs, as Scott introduced a couple of them, yes, we have had Christopher Hitchens and Peter Hitchens. We were the first people in the world to bring them together. Those brothers were estranged. They had not talked to each other in years. We brought them together. They had a great program. They reunited. They even went back to Christopher's, Peter came in from London, but they went back to Christopher's condo in Washington, D.C., and Peter let Christopher, cook him up meals, and they were talking about their childhoods. They reconnected. I like to think that the Hauenstein Center is all about civic friendship and connection, but gosh, after that, to see the personal connection, reuniting a family. We played a role in that. 60 Minutes went into that about 2 years after Christopher died. I mentioned M.D. Anderson. That was where he passed away. I also should mention Peter C. Cooke. We have the Peter C. Cooke Leadership Academy. The Peter Cooke Leadership Academy also reflects a lovely man, a man who had a gift for friendship. Hardly a day goes by when I do not think of Peter and Ralph, and not only them in their separate capacities. I learned so much from those two guys. In fact, I was at a meeting with the Vice President, Karen Loth. Karen, are you in here? I was in a meeting with her yesterday, a long meeting, a substantive meeting, and I invoked Peter's name, Ralph's name, and it was the magic when they came together. What happened? Because they had such great emotional intelligence. And all you had to do is sit back and watch, not be eager to talk, just watch them. And it was so elevating. You came away from those meetings feeling great, a better person, inspired to do better and be better. That was Peter and Ralph. We've had other programs. I'll just give you one more program. One of my favorite programs is, and we had it on C-SPAN, many of you were there actually, was when we had Cornel West, the inimitable Cornel West, and Robbie George. We had them on the same stage. Now, Cornel West and Robbie George came from Princeton University, the faculty there. They're on the opposite ends of the spectrum. There were some theological things they agreed with, but they had a lot of disagreements even about theology. And they also were totally at opposite spectrums politically. So Robbie's very much in the conservative Catholic camp, and Cornell very much in, the radical progressive camp. Unbelievable how these two gentlemen sat on the stage and were able to communicate. And every time a difficult issue came up, every time, they would reframe the question so that they could talk about it. That was an education in itself. Oh, I thought, if only our students could see this, because rather, most of us, we just dive headlong into the argument. If you take a step back and you reframe it, often you'll find that there's a way to move forward. There's a path for finding common ground. So Robbie and Cornell do this again and again, and Cornell would lean over and he'd put his hand, just like Ralph always did, lean over and put his hand on Cornell's forearm, and you'd say, "Brother Robbie, we can solve this problem," and Robbie would say, "Brother Cornell, I know we can solve it." It's a love fest. So Mary Eileen's sitting next to me. After about 15, 20 minutes of this love fest, Mary Eileen leans over to me and she whispers, if husbands and wives acted like that, there would never be any marriage counseling. Now, my mom defined an optimist as a lady who slips her shoes back on when I say, "In conclusion." But I assure you, you can go ahead and put on your shoes. These remarks began by honoring our 41st president. Like many of you, I have been deeply moved by all these heartfelt tributes to George Herbert Walker Bush. I've been blessed to experience his friendship personally. His life recalls a time when public service was a noble endeavor. His extraordinary friendships across the political spectrum should inspire us here and now never to give up in our search for common ground for the common good. Never give up. It's admittedly a personal and a challenge for us, and it's a civic challenge, and it's a perennial challenge in the American experience. But I don't know how we go forward, ladies and gentlemen, if we give up. If we say it's too hard, if we say that people are too angry, if we say that the other side is stupid or evil. It's a noble thing to use our freedom to ask a very basic question. How shall we live together? It's one of the most important questions we ask. Lincoln pointed to a paradox. Our 16th president said in the first inaugural address, "Do I not destroy my enemies when I make them my friends?" After his election and the states started seceding from the Union, Abraham Lincoln composed some of the most sublime words in America's collective memory, and I'd like to leave you with this. "I am loath to close. We are not enemies, but friends. We must not be enemies. Though passion may have strained, it must not break our bonds of affection. The mystic cords of memory, stretching from every battlefield and patriot grave to every living heart and hearthstone all across this broad land, will yet swell the chorus of the Union when again touched, as surely they will be, by the better angels of our nature." Thank you. Questions? Let's have a conversation. We've been talking about conversation. I know there's skeptics out there. Look, 6 years ago, I launched the Common Ground Initiative. And oh, have I heard skeptics every step of the way, but you don't know how stubborn I am. I am a very stubborn person, and I stick to it. We have a question. Yes, sir.
My question is, when it comes to political and religious dialogue, especially when you're trying to find common ground and working very hard to find the things that you have in common and the things that you can work together on, if ultimately you're pursuing truth or believe that what you are standing by is the truth and you can't compromise that, at which point do you have to sort of set aside the I guess, what it is you have in common in order to, I guess, let the truth be found, for lack of a better term? Does that kind of make sense?
We seek common ground where we can, and we stand our ground where we must. And everybody in his own heart, his own mind, has to determine where that line is. But the more, let's go back to Bob Quinn. You ask a very good question. This is the essence of the struggle, exactly what you're getting at. If we go back to Bob Quinn, if you say put what you know will be the contentious issue off to the side, and you tell your core stories without that contentious issue, that changes the temperature. It lets everybody settle into a good conversation. That's one way of doing it. I think that there was a conservative theorist at the start of the Cold War named Frank Meyer. And he came up with a philosophy called fusionism, in which he was trying to get very disparate branches of political thought to start working together. Mostly he was interested in, the libertarians on the one hand and, say, the Catholic and Anglo-Catholic conservatives on the other. How can you get people with such disparate backgrounds together? And then one day it occurred to him, I'm looking at a conversational civil war out in our society, and it reflects the Civil War in my own heart. Think about that, ladies and gentlemen. When you are honest with yourself and you realize that you are fighting all the time, I mean, if you're open, if you're intellectually curious, if you're a good listener to other people, you will find yourself struggling. So Frank Meyer would admit, he said, I'm committed to the individual and I'm committed to the community. Two different principles that you can invoke and build a whole ideology out of. I'm committed to freedom and I'm committed to authority. Two different principles. I'm committed to liberty and I'm committed to equality. I'm committed to the market mechanisms and the free market, but I'm also going to treasure the things that are priceless. Mm-hmm. I have a war inside of myself, Meyer said. And I think out of that, he was able then to approach these different camps and try. It doesn't mean we're going to get, look, the principle of life is opposition, paradox, contradiction. This is why I could never be an ideologue. I'm with Russell Kirk. There's Annette Kirk. We're celebrating the 100th anniversary of Russell Kirk's birthday. He wrote book after book after book about how conservatism is not an ideology. And this was also, by the way, going on the liberal side too. I mean, Arthur Schlesinger in the first decades after the Cold War is writing The Vital Center and going back again and again saying, yeah, I'm a liberal, I'm a progressive, and here are the conservatives. We've got to find a way to find some things we can work on. And it did create a consensus culture. Lived for a brief moment, and then it passed. Great question.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay. Another question. Okay, we got Andrew. Okay, the philosopher is going to come and correct my reading of Aristotle. Go to it, Andrew.
Well, now I feel like I've got a tall order here. No, I liked the reading of Aristotle. It was just fun, and thank you for this. Very, very interesting. Everything. Actually, my questions are about football.
All right. I love talking about
something
football.
I know less about. I liked your analogy.
Kickoff.
Yeah, good. Okay. But maybe you didn't unpack it. So I thought the idea was, well, we have these different teams with different interests, of course, but they come together and preserve a kind of common procedure and set of rules and have a respect for that. Well, I can see an analogy, of course, to like liberal democratic, politics there with oppositional groups. I mean, I assume that's a thing. And that got me to thinking. I mean, I think that the reason people tolerate football, at least those who are excited about it and occupy those two poles, is because they find something intrinsically valuable or enjoyable about that process, about that experience. And I guess I'm curious then, if we take that to the context of liberal democracy, I mean, when I think about the history of liberal democracy, these ideas arose largely to keep us, from killing each other.
Yeah.
So that's not like we saw some great benefit positively, like getting really excited about football, but rather it was just this other way of life that wasn't going to work. Okay, and so we were going to tolerate restrictions on getting things our way because it was better than, religious strife, social strife, things like that. So my question is, do you think there is something intrinsically enjoyable about participating in liberal democratic process such that it really gives like a substantive, value to life in the way that football does for people who are into that sort of thing? You see the kind of the question I'm curious about here?
He's a philosopher.
I'm skeptical,
He's good.
yeah, but
He's
so
good.
I'll sit down to take
I'll have some questions about football for you when we have a drink afterwards, okay? Who's your team, by the way? Okay. Oh, okay. Now, we live at a time, I think the last 30, 40 years, where the romance of politics has entirely disappeared. I'm an historian. I read memoirs. Memoirs are so much fun because, the old quip about historians, the great thing about a historian is that you can read the letters that otherwise would be illegal for you to read. You have access to all these letters that people wrote, for just one set of eyes. But in posterity, you can enjoy them. And you know what let me suggest this. I think these things come in cycles. I think there are periods of time when there is the romance of politics, when people do want to serve. Unfortunately, it's been a long time since we have felt that. I've seen it twice in my lifetime. I'm a 63-year-old guy, so that kind of gives you a little perspective here. But I know that the friends of my older brother and sister were inspired by John F. Kennedy. They thought that Kennedy had just reignited the public square, the Peace Corps. I mean, the desire to go out and serve, that noblesse oblige, if I may use that term, which I know has come under attack, but there was a sense that we're Americans and we have blessings and we need to share those with the rest of the world. There was a sense of youth wanting to participate. There's that place, when you walk up the steps of the student union at the University of Michigan, there's the plaque where he announced the Peace Corps program at 2 a.m. and sometime in October of 1960. What was it, it was early October, I think. And he talks about, really, it's like Lincoln's new birth of freedom. And then, when I was in college, actually maybe between degrees here, when Reagan was elected, I saw a lot of enthusiasm on campus for him. So there was a little boomlet there. And a lot of people traded in their tweed coats, they put on blue suits, and went to Washington. We saw this happen. But I'm telling you, brother, we haven't seen anything like that since the early 1980s. People have soured. I mean, look at the news. People have soured on politics. They've soured on their church. They've soured on civic participation. We're at a real low point. But I think it's cyclical. I don't think this is unique. I think this happens periodically in the American experience. Another time, just since I'm an historian, indulge me, but I think another great time for when there was just incredible enthusiasm, where a generation's talent was poured into public service, was with the founding. The founding generation, where you have this group of men and women who are thinking seriously about political questions and how we're going to live together. What a legacy they left. My challenge with students today is, how do I impart the romance of politics? I do not think politics is just intrinsically dirty. I know it has to do with power. I've read my Machiavelli. I know my Thrasymachus in the Republic by Plato. I know all of the arguments against my position here, to be arguing for the romance of politics. But as I say, I'm stubborn. I'm going to stick to it. I'm going to keep working with young people and try to get them, wherever possible, where there's an opening, to see the nobility of elective office, of public service, and of giving something of yourself to your community. And I'm lucky. We have 70 people in the Cooke Leadership Academy who already are sort of wired that way. So that part of the job is easy, but in a larger student population, I admit it's more challenging. Great question, thank you. Another question. Yes, ma'am.
Well, this is kind of a question. I love quotes, and one of my favorite quotes is, labels are for soup cans. Labels are only for soup cans. And it was attributed to President George H.W. Bush. Is that true?
I don't know.
I love that label because we
Anybody
label.
know?
We label
Let's
people.
crowdsource this.
We,
Come on, researchers.
we label people and say, oh, you're that, and then so you can't be that. But, you know, when you label people, you limit what they can become with their experience. And so I just thought I would.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah,
That's absolutely right. I mean, I think we have a great country that tends to be non-ideological, that tends to eschew labels, and I think that's right to your point. I hope we're not drifting into an ideological direction where people just close down, they know what they believe, they know which television station they're going to tune into to get their talking points, to hell with the rest. I hope we're not going there. I hope we back off from that. President Lubbers, what an honor to see you.
A very practical question that I would like your personal help on. For those of us who find Donald Trump unacceptable, his personality, the way he demeans people, everything about him personally offends me. Now, how do we, who really believe in the American system, how do we operate in this period? How do we bring some objectivity to the situation to evaluate what we think is okay and moving in the right direction, like I like trade renegotiation? How do we do that when we dislike this person so intensely?
You didn't know that I had this filled with gin, and it's just for moments like this. The funny thing about that question, ladies and gentlemen, is that I have lunch with Don every Monday. And he knows I'm the one looking to him for help. He's much wiser than I. You know, there's a great saying that comes, I think, from Islamic culture, and this too shall pass. If you feel that way, and I know many people do, I think we have to exercise what patience we have in terms of the big things that we cannot change. It's kind of like the serenity prayer. It will pass. The question is, how long does it take for it to pass, and what is our role in the meantime? And when I'm working with young people, as I do every day, it's part of the job, it's the glory of the job of working at Grand Valley State University, to work with these bright young people. And they give you hope. It's the young people who give us hope. They can look beyond this. They are idealistic. They're full of energy. They want to do great things. They don't want to get bogged down in the questions that lead me down. And I find that inspiring. They want to go out. They're like the Marines that want to hit the beach. They're trained to hit the beach. You don't stick them in an office. Hit the beach. These young people want to go out and serve. They want to go to foreign countries and learn more. They want to understand how this world really works and how they can play a good constructive role in it. I hear you, Don. So I don't get upset at things. I stay focused on the people right here that I am given to have some impact on. And that's all I can do. As Voltaire said, we cultivate our garden, our own garden. And you're pretty good at doing that yourself. Did that help at all? So next Monday at lunch, I'm going to hear. He's going to grade it. Okay. Jeff, my good buddy Jeff.
Thank you for your
Tocqueville
presentation.
scholar.
Yeah, well, of a sort. Yeah. You mentioned this idea of civic friendship, And when Aristotle talks about that, he talks about things like living in proximity with each other, working closely together, reciprocity, mutual dependency, duty, obligation, this kind of stuff. The enemy of all that is hypermobility, right? And that's really the cause of loneliness, is we live in a highly ambulatory culture. The main mechanism of hypermobility in our culture are colleges and universities. So I'm kind of curious. It's a three-part question, I suppose. Do you think hypermobility is a problem? If so, what can be done about it? And how might you rethink our colleges and universities in terms of their role in this?
Jeff. Now here's another, folks, this is another setup because Jeff and I we just had lunch just a couple of weeks ago. Oh boy. You're the guy I would go to for that answer. No, seriously, I mean, the hypermobility, let's just take that first. You're absolutely right. I mean, okay, I spent 15 years of my life in Colorado. I wrote a book about Colorado, and when I came to the point about what is happening to Colorado, why are crime rates higher? And it was precisely because of these sociological issues, because there was such a mobile population. People were moving in from Michigan, putting down roots. This is back in the 70s, folks. All of my neighbors were Michiganders. I had no idea I'd be a resident of this state in those days. And they all are writing me going, ha, 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 we're skiing today and it's sunny and, I'm here in Michigan. They have a little schadenfreude problem. But anyway, Jeff, I agree with you. I mean, I think the mobility is a problem. It certainly makes it more difficult to form attachments with other people. But let's look at a college or a university. We all know the rules. Going into a college or university, it's going to be, 4 or 5, or in some cases 6, 7 years. Get that bachelor's degree. But people form a real sense of community. I mean, just about everybody I know who enjoyed their college years made lifelong friends. And so you could almost turn that on its head and say, the community of people, especially as I was finding out who I really am. I had this, professor who taught me political philosophy, Professor Jeff, and he was great. And a band of students forms a community around that kind of thing. I know in Ann Arbor, I formed a community of lifelong friendships. I mean, people that I'm in touch with, some of my dearest friends to this day. So college cuts two ways. You form new community out of it. My life would be much poorer if I didn't have my Ann Arbor friends, who've, of course, dispersed. They're all over now, but yeah. I don't know if that gets at you. You know what? We'll have lunch in a couple of weeks. I'm going to pick your brain on that because I'm going to learn a lot from you. Okay, another question. We've got time for maybe one more question. Yes, ma'am. Okay,
I'm
Becky.
just an English teacher. I don't know the politics thing, but I'm a very liberal one.
Okay.
And everyone knows that who knows me.
Okay.
I've never felt lonely. I just don't. And I kind of think those of us on my political persuasion don't feel lonely. We feel very much part of a group. And I think it's the people, maybe this will argue with Jeff, was it, who didn't go to college, who weren't educated, who haven't had the advantages that I've had and that people in this room have had, who are the lonely ones. And that's why they've gone for somebody who gives them a sense of belonging in a very different way with Mr. Trump.
Interesting perspective. I don't know that I would agree with you, though. I think the data, and let me just answer the social science part of this, suggests that it cuts all across. We know people in sort of the white-collar professions that are lonely. They feel cut off. Maybe it's because they've moved. We know people who've not gone to college who are rooted to their communities, their churches, their Rotary Club, their civic organizations, their elementary school. I don't know that I would be able to accept that generalization. But I appreciate your perspective. I mean, that's your perspective.
I don't know. I'm really asking.
I don't know if somebody else has a
I've just-
perspective on that. Do we have a question over here or a comment? Okay. That was not a very satisfactory response on my part, but thank you very much for offering that idea. Yes, sir.
It occurs to me that the speed of technology and science is going at such an incredible rate of change that we, in our mindset, subconsciously, is not able to keep up with it. We get lonely because how can people be lonely when they have a cell phone? So
Notice the laughter?
I think that we are overwhelmed by the speed of technology and science and those disciplines, and we're just sitting back here and we're not going near as fast as everything is around us.
You make a great comment, and
Yeah, I'm just wondering if you see my point.
I absolutely see your point. And one of the things you learn in college, and Grand Valley, I think, does a really good job of this, is there's two kinds of thinking. There's convergent thinking, that's the thinking of science and technology and engineering, where you're trying to converge to a problem. That's the ideal, anyway, in the hard sciences, the applied sciences. It's converging all the way, all the inputs. You're trying to build that bridge. You want the mathematical equations, you want everything to work out. It converges. And then there's divergent thinking. Now, I'm a humanities guy. I'm in the divergent thinking camp. The more interpretations you throw at me, the better. The happier I am. The more chaos out there in the inputs, the happier I am, because then I think people in the humanities are trying to figure out, well, what are the ethical ramifications of this new piece of technology? What about cloning? Cloning comes about because of convergent thinking. Some really smart people figured out how to do it. But then you need the divergent thinkers to ask a really basic question. What if there is somebody out there, say a very entrepreneurial type, who wants to clone a servant class? Maybe people who do not have a whole lot of drive, and it could be a servile class for the elite. And then you have the divergent thinkers who need to come along and say, wait a second, is that not robbing the human person of his or her dignity to create such a creature deliberately? Sir, I would recommend, take some of the great classes, well, you probably already have taken and probably have many degrees, but I would suggest that the convergent and the divergent thinkers need to get together and work together every step of the way and anticipate problems like loneliness and the social pathologies that go along with loneliness. It's absolutely critical as we move forward. There are going to be so many changes in our society. Look at what robotics, artificial intelligence is going to do to this society. Look at the workers who will not have work. We can't just let people who don't have work languish. They have dignity too. But you talk about the people who design their robots and they get all excited and fetch me a beer. This is great. But what about the people who will not be working? You need those divergent thinkers who are going to take in all of these different theories of the way people work and struggle with ethics and all the rest of it. And that's, again, I come back to the students. And a lot of these Cooke Leadership Fellows, the overwhelming majority of them, I see a willingness. And Chad Dowding, our program manager for the Cooke Leadership Academy, has done a great job assembling students each year in each class who welcome both convergent and divergent thinking. That's it, baby. That's how we go forward. And with that, I think I've tested your patience. Thank you so much. Had a lot of fun tonight. Thank you.